What will life look like in the US in the next 20 years? I think we're looking at a lot more bad than good, so let's get into the specifics. First, the economy and the job market. The question on everyone's mind right now, of course, is just exactly how many people will AI replace? How many jobs will it replace? And I think the answer is going to fall between the two extremes of nobody and everybody. Well, we know the answer is not nobody because AI is already replacing certain job roles. However, I don't think it's likely to replace absolutely everybody, at least not for a very long time, if ever. Now, the good news here, if you can call it good news, is that there will be a level of reskilling that's possible. There will be some jobs that human beings need to do, but they will need to be trained in AI skills. This will be some of the jobs that are created over the next 20 years. However, I don't think it's going to be a lot. And there will be some jobs that the system is going to be extremely slow to replace, even if it might be technically feasible at some point. For example, jobs that require licensure or require human judgment or human presence, those are going to be some of the last jobs to be replaced if they get replaced at all. And I'm talking about jobs like police officer, teacher, judge, nannies, daycare, caretakers, a lot of medical or medical adjacent roles that really need a human touch. So, at least for right now, there is no, at least from what I can tell, there is no preparation for setting up AI robots to take over those kinds of roles that require licenses, say. And just in general, jobs that require a human being to sign off on something and take responsibility for something won't be as easily outsourced to robots. Below that, I would say that complex physical tasks, such as a lot of the trades, like say electrician, those jobs can get replaced eventually, but I think we're still a ways off from that. There are already robots who can do menial physical tasks like stocking shelves or even some more fast or complex things like playing tennis. There was a story about a tennis playing robot maybe a couple months ago. So, on the lower end, jobs that require sitting in front of a keyboard and clacking away at the keys, these are already starting to get replaced or partially replaced. And then after that, it will be simple physical labor tasks like shelf stocking or cashiering, maybe something like that. Something interesting about the cashiers, though, is self checkouts did not end up taking over everything completely. There's still a human presence there. There's been different issues with that, like in some areas, crime. People just walking out if it's only a self checkout, no human being. Things like that. But I would say expect a small human presence, which in some places now that's already the case. I mean, you go into a Walmart, they might have 2 lanes open these days, but they do have human cashiers. They just don't have nearly as many as they used to. So, in a lot of areas, I would say expect less human presence over time, but there will still be something. And then things like store managers, those will be humans. Okay, so what about technology in general? Well, let's talk about AI again, except this time in terms of what it will eventually become capable of. Now, I don't think that artificial consciousness will ever be achievable. I don't think this is something that's even possible. That doesn't mean that AGI is impossible. AI will certainly improve, but I don't think it will really become conscious. Now, I'm sure there will be a big debate about this in the future, as there is now. Questions about what exactly constitutes consciousness and is biology truly necessary for consciousness and things like that. That's part of the reason I don't think AI will ever fully replace humanity, at least when it comes to, well, the humanities, the arts, things like that. Things that require creativity. Now, will those things be economically useful all of a sudden? I'm not saying that, but the human mind does revile something that is too perfect. And when you look at things like AI writing that is just so textbook perfect, it's a little bit unsettling in a way. And yes, I've read these headlines about how people can't tell the difference between an AI story or a human-made, human-written story. But those are worth looking into more because you need to look at what's the size of the sample. Is it a paragraph, a page, a chapter, or is it a whole book or a whole article? Is it creative writing? Is it technical writing? Is it argumentation? There are a lot of things to look at. I'm not saying that AI can't write very convincing works. Of course it can. But I think there will always be something that humanity can do better creatively, because a machine does not have emotions. It doesn't have feelings. It doesn't have memories, or at least not the same way that we do. So again, I'm not saying that we're going to have a future economy where everyone's going to get to be artists and filmmakers and poets and singers and all this stuff. I'm not saying that. I very much doubt that will happen, even if a UBI is implemented at some point. Okay, so another one, a little bit adjacent to that. Will human minds be able to be uploaded to computers and achieve a sort of technical immortality? Well, I think there are going to be issues with this. And that is because there is a difference between uploading data to a machine and uploading consciousness. Again, I think one of the big issues with consciousness is you need biology for it, or at least it appears that way. And then for those who argue that you don't need biology for consciousness, then you're talking about consciousness of a different type. And then it's a question of, well, is that really consciousness? The questions around AI and mind uploading alone are just enough to overload anybody. So will uploading a version of a person's mind be possible? I think so, but that will be more data. It won't be a personality. It won't really be memories outside of data. That is to say, it won't be memories with emotions attached. So uploading a person's mind might be possible in the sense that you're uploading a simulation or a copy that's not really a copy. So I think when it comes to uploading consciousness, what we would really be looking at is uploading a simulation of someone's mind. It wouldn't really be them. Okay, another big one I want to talk about is energy. And this is something I've been thinking about more lately because of the war in Iran. Now, while I'm not all in on the peak oil doomsday idea, I do think there are a lot of issues with energy, and it's clear that geopolitics can easily disrupt energy supplies. And it doesn't take very long for that to have serious ramifications for the global economy, as we're seeing now. One thing I've noticed for years is that what we're doing to get oil out of the ground looks like it's increasingly difficult. So the two things that come to mind here are fracking and deep sea oil drilling. So basically what it looks like to me is that oil demand is generally going up, and basically for the economy to keep growing, which we'll get into in a minute, we need increasing amounts of oil, and this is getting harder and harder to get. This is what it looks like to me. And then you have the issues of light sweet crude and then the sour crude. And then with fracking, I know there's an intensive cleaning process of what they get out of the ground. So as this pertains to how life will be over the next 20 years, here's what I would imagine. Expect there to be some bumps in the road, and sometimes there will be some mountains in the road. You will have times when prices are going way up, when inflation gets really bad, because that's really a reflection of the value of money, which is not really backed up by anything except, things like faith and energy. So when you have especially things like geopolitical problems, you can expect prices to get bad for a while. And that doesn't mean that they won't ever come back down. They will. Things will fluctuate. And this is one of the things that's going to be really frustrating as we go forward, is that stability is just not going to be a facet of normal life anymore. And you could argue it's really not now. Okay, so on the topic of stability, let's talk about social issues. And the first one I'll address is the birth rates. So it's pretty widely known now because of the internet that birth rates around much of the world are declining. You've got total fertility rates in many countries, especially developed countries, that are well under the 2.1 needed for population to be sustained. And you see it being really bad in some countries, such as South Korea and Japan, Singapore, and then, of course, most of the Western world. The US is actually one of the least bad ones, which might surprise some people. Western Europe is not as bad, although this is because of immigration, which is another social issue that's causing a lot of problems. So the declining birth rates are really part of a larger negative feedback loop where something gets worse, and then that causes other parts of life to get worse, to get more difficult, to get more expensive. So you have the issues with energy, and the economy is probably reaching its limits of growth. So that means that the value of your money goes down because it's not really backed by anything solid or stable anymore, like it used to be backed by gold. Well, that means day-to-day life is less stable. That means your purchasing power goes down, which means it's harder to buy a house, which means it's harder to find a spouse, which means it's harder to have children because you can't afford them. And then when you add in other crazy things like the cost of healthcare, or not knowing when you might get wiped out by debt, or healthcare bill or something like that, then that is not exactly conducive to most people starting families. It just becomes less and less feasible. And that is especially true for developed countries, developed economies. So again, like Japan, South Korea, the US, the UK, Germany, Australia. The birth rates are slightly higher in developing countries, but even then there are some surprising numbers. I mean, you've got places like, say, Thailand, or parts of Eastern Europe, or parts of Southeast Asia, that their birth rates are dropping below replacement levels too. So this is becoming a global phenomenon. Now, of course, there are still people being born, and global average lifespans are still high, which means that the global population is still going to grow for a while. And I think that explains a lot of the paradox of how the global population is going up while the birth rates are going down. That will eventually change, although that's probably not going to be a happy time to live through. Okay, so on that note, let's talk about the divide between the sexes. It's really no secret anymore that, especially in Western countries, the divide between male and female has become like a chasm, and it doesn't seem like there's much in the way of fixing that anytime soon. And this ties into issues of things like political polarization and whatnot, or things becoming normalized that make building a stable life much harder. For example, things like hookup culture, gentle parenting, extreme ideologies, and so on. All right, so let's tie that into the loneliness epidemic, which we're also hearing a lot about, because that is very closely related. That will probably worsen for the foreseeable future because we have things like an aging population. They tend to get cut off from people, and it gets very lonely. And there are some bitter ends that happen that society is a bit recalcitrant to talk about a lot of times. Now, as Gen X starts approaching retirement age, and millennials are getting solidly into middle age, and Gen Z have become young adults, there are going to be some shifts. Because as we talked about earlier, birth rates are down, marriage rates are down. There's the divide between the sexes. There's a lot of polarization, a lot of social and economic divides, and just a general lack of stability. And so this makes it much harder to start families and to have a community that you're a part of, and to have families and things like this. So, and I'm going to make some videos about this going forward, but we're probably looking at not as much Gen X, but some, but certainly millennials and probably Gen Z when they get there. They're going to have some lonely middle ages, and there are probably going to be a lot of cases of people Again, mostly millennial and Gen X when they get there dying alone. It's a sad topic, but I do want to talk about that more in the future in a different video. Okay, so next let's talk about education. The old American dream style system of go to college, get a degree, and you come out and there's a job waiting for you. This is already passed over. This was really over about close to 20 years ago, I would say, with the great financial crisis. And over the past 20 years, a lot of people have slowly accepted it. And you seem to have a lot more people now who look into alternatives such as trade school, or if they do go to college, they want to really only go if they have a solid plan and are going to pursue a difficult degree that has relatively good employability afterwards. You've got a lot of people who are pursuing making money online, and you've got some people who have dropped out. They can't find anything, they're struggling, and they just sort of disappear from the numbers. And you've got a lot of people who are working in the gig economy, so they are not counted as unemployed, but they are definitely not thriving, most of them. We've already seen some universities close their doors or cut things way back because they're just not getting the customers, students, that they used to get, along with all that sweet federal student loan money. And then when you add in the complications of a declining population with far fewer younger people, they just probably don't have much of a future in higher education. Okay, so we've really run the gamut from geopolitics to energy, the economy, birth rates and marriage rates and family formation and higher education. So let me tie it all together a bit and try to give you a picture of what I think the average life is going to look like over the next 20 years. And here's what I think will be a major theme, is that it's not going to be all bad, but it's going to be pretty bad for a lot of people. And as always, that divide is going to have a lot to do with economic prospects, which leads into pretty much all the other kinds of prospects. And I would guess we're looking at maybe an 80-20 or a 90-10 split. We're basically going to have a very small middle class. It really won't be a middle class because it won't be the middle. It will be, what's under the top of the pyramid, and it won't be a very big scion of society. And then we're going to have a much bigger underclass, a much bigger working class, a much bigger impoverished class. So, of course, this will vary from country to country, but I'm really focusing on the U.S. here. I don't think things like UBI are very likely. Things would have to get pretty extreme for that to happen, in my opinion, and I'm not sure that that's a good idea anyway. And I think well before that would happen, we would be seeing things like the expansion of certain welfare programs, stimulus checks, which we've seen fairly recently with COVID, extended unemployment benefits, things like that. I think that would come way before any kind of UBI type of system. And if a UBI system did come along, there are going to be a lot of strings attached. You're going to give up some parts of your freedom. Again, I'm just being realistic. What we really need is stability so that people can make livings and afford homes and start families and things like that. That's what we really need. Not that we're going to get it. So I think you're going to see a class of people. They're going to be the new middle class, so to speak, even though it won't really be the middle. They're going to be people who picked well when it came to higher education, those who came from stable family backgrounds, who maybe have more connections, more opportunities, more family wealth to get started. And again, that's nothing new per se. I just think that the divide will become more stratified. So I would think of it as something like 1% wealthy class, and then 9% new upper class or new middle class or whatever you'd want to call it, and then a 90% underclass, or maybe an 80% underclass if we're lucky. So if you were going to be a member of the underclass, as most of us will probably be, a big theme of that will be the instability of day-to-day life. You might go grocery shopping on Tuesday and eggs are $2 a dozen, and then you go the next week and they're $8 a dozen because there may be something going on geopolitically. The stock market may be going crazy. A jobs report may come out and it just makes the economy go crazy. People will probably find ways to scrape by, or at least a lot of them will for a while. It's a lot like what's happening now, except I think that will become more extreme. Probably one of the better outcomes is that things like AI uh, reinvigorate or maybe add a new sector to the gig economy, or even better case scenario, somehow adds new jobs that a lot of people can reskill for. I don't think that's super likely, but it might be there in some cases. And so, with that instability and the lack of prospects, I would say expect life to get lonelier, to get more isolating. And I do think some things like dating app culture and hookup culture is going to, I don't want to say go away, it won't do that, but it will decline, or it will be less normalized just because so many more people will sort of drop out of that part of society and they will quit trying. And people are already tired of how things like dating app culture is just about validation. It's not really about relationships or getting to know someone. And there have been uh, financial problems at a lot of these companies that create dating apps. However, I don't think a whole lot's going to replace that. Now, again, with things like AI, that I could be completely wrong. That might, in some ways, prop up that sector of society, and we might reach levels of dystopia that we can only imagine right now. Sadly, I don't think a whole lot is going to replace waning human interaction, especially, of course, if more jobs are replaced and people aren't able to start families and the population is declining. Then that doesn't bode well for community, for human interaction, for socialization, for things like that. So, over the next 20 years, I think we're going to see an entrenchment of digital life. We're going to see it do nothing but expand to take over more and more of people's lives, their time, their attention, their energy. Now, of course, the constraint on that is everyone only has 24 hours in a day, no matter what part of society you're in, no matter what class you're in, no matter how much wealth you have or how impoverished you are, you only have the same 24 hours. But I would say don't put it past the system to find a way to squeeze even more time out of an already time squeezed society. And if there is a silver lining to that, it's that I could imagine that at some point there will be a proportion of the population that just decides to disengage from the digital world. And you've already seen this to some extent with people, and this is actually Gen Z mostly, I think, just switching to dumb phones, giving themselves sort of digital fasts, periodically, like maybe 1 day a week or 2 days a week, where they just don't use screens, don't use digital platforms, things like that. So I could actually imagine that kind of phenomenon growing because people are just fed up with it. And there's really a deeper impoverishment that goes on when everything becomes digital and artificial and simulated instead of real, genuine human connection. And that also becomes sort of a way to protect yourself from the onslaught of endless information and slop. Now, will people actually replace that with anything meaningful, or are they just going to get tired of it to the point where they've been so hyper stimulated for so long that they can't do that anymore, but at the same time their brains are burned out and they just don't have the energy or the inclination to replace it with anything, or to try to seek out human connection. They'll just be tired and burned out. It'd be like a burned out light bulb, maybe, where it doesn't function anymore, but you can't really do anything with it anyway. Now, in the world, with geopolitics and everything, I do expect there to be more wars. And the simple explanation for that is that things are unstable. Energy is getting harder to get out of the ground. We're living in a world that has, I think, reached its limits to growth more or less. and the population is still increasing, although a lot of things are in decline. And that, in some ways, is a very difficult historical cycle to live through, because you're halfway between the old world or the old order and whatever's going to come next and become the new world order. And it's just human nature that most people don't know what to do. They don't figure out what to do themselves. They see other people start to do it. They see something gain momentum, and there's sort of a bandwagon effect, and then that eventually becomes the way things are from that point. Just like right now, you still have people who are going to college and they are going for degrees in, history or performing arts or something like that, even though their employability is going to be at, DoorDash level or Starbucks level, if that, at this point. So they're still caught between the old way and the new way. And the old way has no future, but they don't see what the new way is yet. So they're still defaulting to the old thing, the old system. So, of course, that means a lot of futures get lost, a lot of futures get destroyed. And we've already seen that. I mean, things like, what happened in 2020, that destroyed a lot of futures. A lot of people had plans for a different kind of future than they've ended up with here 6 years later. And I'm certainly one of them. So if you're able to look ahead and you're able to make better selections on things like education, or maybe where you are in the country, cultivating human interaction, networking, things like that, forming good bonds and connections. And again, I know a lot of that is not just choice. A lot of that comes down to luck or being in the right place at the right time. It comes down to the serendipity or the lack thereof in life. But if you're defaulting to doing things the way the old system had people doing it, then you're probably going to struggle, and your future is going to take some bad turns. So if you think you're just going to go to college and then come out and get a decent job, and if you think you're going to buy a home when you're 28, or you think you're going to meet your future wife while you're grocery shopping one day or at the bookstore, and you're going to have 3 kids, and that things are going to go according to plan in your life financially, then you're setting yourself up for a fantasy, not the reality. And so I think the 2 biggest groups of winners over the next 20 years, the one will be those who happen to get things right, whether it's because they tried to or not, but they end up in sort of that new middle class or that new upper class. And so they do have jobs, or they have decent jobs, and they're able to start families and things like that. And again, that just comes down to a lot of things that will be beyond a lot of people's control. The second group that I think is going to at least survive, if not thrive to an extent, are those who can look beyond what the system is telling them to do and find ways to succeed, and even in small ways to succeed in instability. And again, some people are more naturally like that, some people are not. I would say I don't do very well with instability. I do better with stability. But there are people who can take unstable times and they still find ways to live a life and to get what they need from life. And those people probably stand to at least endure it and come out on the other side. Okay, so we really ran the gamut of topics today, but let us know in the comments what you think the next 20 years will hold for the U.S., for the West, for the world, because it's a fascinating conversation. And if you have any insights to share, please do that. If you do all the YouTube stuff, give us a thumbs up, a like, a subscribe. That would help us keep doing what we do, because I really would like to keep making more videos about what the future will look like and how technology is changing society and the issues that millennials and Gen Z and others face and things like that. So thank you for listening, and please let us know what you think in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one.